So, every now and then when you go on Witch Talk, you'll probably see someone say that, like, Christian holidays were stolen from pagan holidays, so on and so forth, and it's a tired old argument that we all have every year. We all just really enjoy hashing out the same conversations over and over and over again for some reason. But here's where I'm going to say, did you know that yes, for every one of the 8 neo-pagan Reconstructionist holidays, there is in fact a Catholic holiday to match it? So today we are talking about that syncretic calendar of the year and how these Catholic holidays line up in a way that you can easily and very authentically take your understanding of nature and religion and tie it into one consistent celebration. So the first things first that we have to talk about before we even get into this is what syncretic means. Syncretism is a concept that tells people basically the story of how religions end up blending together. So whenever 2 different people end up next to each other, they will share and trade some ideas with each other, right? And then so it's kind of like how red and blue become purple, right? And while not all cultures are peacefully converted to their respective religions, the fact remains that whether or not it is ancient pagan Rome, whether or not it is ancient Christian Rome, they had a very similar tactic of kind of walking into someone else's backyard and trying to take the native religion and blend it with the Roman religion for the sake of helping empire develop. It doesn't matter whether it was pre or post Christianity. That's what they did. We can see evidence of Rome doing this, especially in the Gaulish peoples, around Celtic peoples. Right? We have Rome trying to compare certain Gaulish goddesses to Roman goddesses. We have the Roman pantheon essentially being a blend of Greek gods and native Etruscan gods. Right? That's how we get Zeus to Jupiter. That's how we get Aphrodite to Venus, so on and so forth. This was not a new idea. This is absolutely not something that came out of nowhere. This was kind of a direct consequence of conquest and empire and all those other kinds of things to begin with. I mean, just look at how much Greece ended up blending their ideas with Egypt. We had a lot of different gods being kind of compared to Hermes among the Greeks for some reason. And then there's, of course, Hermes Trismegistus, which is kind of a combination of Hermes and Thoth. So anyone who says that Christians stole this and that, I hate to break it to you guys, but there's a long history of this kind of thing happening just on basis of the fact that empire exists, and when you conquer a people, you have to do something to blend your 2 peoples, or else they're going to constantly have tensions with each other. That's just what empire do. And this is something that, of course, Jewish people experience themselves too. This is where in the reign of King Josiah, all of his reforms, in fact, the entire book of Deuteronomy is expressly to deny these syncretic elements that were happening, because the Neo-Assyrians and the Akkadians were actually running up onto their land, kind of taking it over, mingling with the people, and leaving a lot of their pagan practices deposited into Israelite custom, tradition, culture, and religion. So these reforms were a way to kind of cut that out and reestablish that, nope, this is who we are, and this is what we believe, and this is what we do, and these are our laws. That's exactly why the book of Deuteronomy is kind of just a big rehashing of Exodus, because the people who wrote it wanted to do that as a counter-charter against the people who were trying to aggress on and blend with their people. When it comes to Europe, as the new religion of Christianity spread, this is no different. Rome was still an empire. Whether or not they changed religious clothes doesn't matter. They were still an empire, and they still wanted to take these areas, and whether it was under the banner of the Capitolina or under Christ did not matter. As a result, of course, we get a lot of interesting things in our Christian holidays. We get, bunnies and eggs on Easter, despite that having really little to do with the concept of Jesus coming back from the dead. We have Christmas trees and evergreen and all these other kinds of interesting traditions, the mistletoe and stuff, that don't really have anything to do with a story about a family fleeing from persecution in the desert. But when you understand the concept of syncretism, it's really easy to see how old traditions became repurposed for a new religion. And that's what syncretism is. Because I'll be honest with you guys, it would be really resource heavy and intensive and bad economics for the Roman Empire to just be continuously going to direct war with other people, you know? So at some point, they had to kind of do things more peacefully than we all want to believe Christianity did. When it comes to, say, Ireland, a lot of that was just missionary work, and it took centuries for that to happen. It took centuries for Ireland to completely give up on the old religion and start a new religion, and even then, things remained. Saint Bridget is very obviously just the goddess Bridget, but with a saint put on her and a nice story written about her so that she could stay with the people. And even among Rome, I mean, the actual worship of Roman gods eventually fell out because the popes of the Roman Empire, they reminded people, hey, you know, we're not celebrating the birth of the sun anymore, right? We're not doing that anymore. There's no sun god. It's the son of God that, right? Like, the popes literally had to issue statements saying, hey guys, remember not to do the pagan stuff anymore because we're doing this stuff now. It wasn't like Rome attacked itself. They just, if anything, they were attacking themselves before that. In the early Christianity is when they were attacking themselves, because early Christians, when they refused to light incense for the Capitolina, as in like Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, they would get killed. So the point is, actually, you know, again, they had to kind of introduce this new religion that slowly went from being the imperial family religion, Constantine and all that, to the entire state religion under Theodosius. They had to introduce that slowly, and they had to give avenues for people to convert. So there is actually some evidence that the date for Christmas was set before Saturnalia, actually, most likely because Christmas itself had to do more with those state cults, right? There was a very secret state cult for a god of the sun, I believe his name was Mithras, and this deity was supposed to be born around this time, and so obviously what the church did is kind of just put the birth of Jesus here instead, and that allowed people to carry old, you know, customs and traditions over into a new religion. And of course, it's also just the winter solstice, and no one really has any trademark on solstice celebrations. The same thing happened all throughout the land. So if we look at the story of the Bible, we can actually see how the math works out. So if you put Christmas on December, that means you get Candlemas on about February 2nd, which is really convenient for catching the Celts, right? The Celts with Imbolc, that's really convenient for catching them. We have, you know, all these other holidays that line up. If St. John was born 6 months before Jesus, congratulations. That handles the summer solstice real good. So it's all these kind of little convenient tricks of mathematics and clever planning on behalf of the church that managed to get a calendar that looks very much like this now neo-pagan reconstruction Celtic calendar, which has those 8 holidays. So let's go through it. So in our winter months, right, we have Christmas, and we have Candlemas, and then we also have Yule, and we have Imbolc. Now, Yule, or Yule in Scandinavian, have nothing to do with Christianity. They don't have anything to do with it at all. It's just so obvious that when people became Christianized, they took old traditions into the new religion. That's why in Scandinavian countries, they'll still call Christmas Yule because that's just what they were doing beforehand, and they never bothered updating the name. That doesn't mean that Christianity stole it, or that Christmas is a carbon copy of it. It just means that they said, okay, cool, very nice holiday, and then just continued doing what they're doing and said it was Christmas. And beyond that, the idea that it was stolen from Yule is very odd if you look at a map of Europe, because Rome is way down here and Scandinavia is way up there. Like, that was like 1000 AD before they were done Christianizing completely. And let me tell you, Christianity was around a lot longer than that. A lot longer than that. Like a good at least 700 years longer than that. So right away, right, we can see that just because there are some similar things or similar names in certain countries doesn't mean they're the same holiday. What it does mean is that a lot of people took their old traditions of, you know, hanging mistletoe or putting up evergreen to represent eternal life. They took that into their new religion and associated it with Jesus. If we're celebrating the, you know, darkest day and now it's going to get brighter again, well, that's a message of hope and wonder, and what better way to do that than with the, you know, light of the world that is Jesus. They're very similar thematically, and because of that, they line up well enough that people can literally just copy-paste the traditions they and their families have always followed into this new religion. Imbolc is the exact same way. Imbolc is all about purification, tossing off the last of the darkness, getting back into society, waking up, starting fresh. And so is Candlemas. Candlemas represents when Mary was, you know, she was out back into society again, because Jewish law dictated that once you had a kid, you had to stay home for like at least 40 days before you could come back out, which is basically biblical maternity leave, right? But because of how the math lines up, that day falls just right around Imbolc, and so it's a perfect thematic sync up, right? Mary's coming back into society. She's being purified. She's rejoining the world again. She's waking up. She's bringing her son, the light of the world, out back into everyone's purview. And of course, there are other traditions on the Catholic calendar that line up with these traditional European themes, right? So Shrovetide, or the period right before Lent starts, is all about partying, waking up, right? So if you look at Slovenia, we have the Kurinti, and these are like very, very obviously pagan items or pagan creatures, but their point is that they shake bells and they wake up spring and they chase winter away with all their loud noise and their big scary faces, and that's a part of Christian tradition now. It's a way that old Slavic and new Christian blended together, because there's never a time where the Kurint shows up in the Bible. So obviously Christianity didn't steal that. Christianity doesn't claim that. You know, if you ask your average Christian, hey, yeah, how about the Kurint? They're not going to know what you're talking about, because that's a specifically Slovenian thing that managed to survive and just take on a new context in the new religion. Now, in the springtime, of course, we have Easter and we have May Day, which line up with Ostara and also Beltane. And before anyone starts with me, Easter is not Ostara, not even remotely. Everyone always says, but look, the names are basically the same. That doesn't mean anything. Easter is only called Easter in Germanic languages. Germanic languages like, obviously, German, right? Osten, and English. Easter. In the Anglo-Saxon whole situation happening there, we have one very shaky account of potentially maybe some Eoster, which there's no evidence of a goddess named Eoster outside of this one account by Bede that everyone is pretty much aware is bunk as hell. So when people say, no, Ostara, it all came out of Eoster, no. Again, as I said, right, no one has a trademark on winter festivals, and no one has a trademark on spring festivals either. To say that Easter is Ostara is to actually erase the entire Jewish origins of the holiday. It comes from Passover, and that's why you'll see so many languages like Albanian, French, all these other kinds of things calling it some form of Passover. Pascha is literally Aramaic for Passover, and that's the name of the holiday in so many of these languages, because Passover is a springtime festival, right? Passover commemorates the flee of the Israelites from Egypt, and Exodus, the entire story of Exodus, that is commemorated in Passover. And so there's a lot of those themes of, again, getting free, waking back up, coming out back into the world, so on and so forth. And of course in Christianity that's significant because Jesus' last meal was a Passover meal. So in Christianity it's not so much about the springtime, it's about the concordance of the story. It's about when these things happened. So Jesus became that paschal lamb, that sacrificial lamb that was supposed to be, served up every single Passover. Jesus became that for Christians. That's the significance of that story. And you might be asking yourself, well, what about bunnies and what about eggs? Well, it turns out because rabbits were thought to breed without breeding, right? They were thought to be able to just multiply without doing the do. They got associated with the Virgin Mary. And the whole egg thing, there is so many cultures that have a concept of eggs meaning rebirth. Like, it's not a new concept, it's not a new idea. And so obviously all of these cultures, like Slavic cultures, when they would color eggs for their old gods, this new religion came around and they found a new reason to color eggs. Beyond that, there's also the Christian folktale of Saint Mary literally bringing an egg to Emperor Tiberius or so on, and she says, hey, Jesus rose from the dead, and Emperor Tiberius says, this egg on the table will turn red before I believe that, and then it turned red. That's the Christian reason for coloring eggs. So all these cultures that colored eggs before can just keep doing it for that reason. It's almost like syncretism exists. Going into summer, we have St. John's Day, and then we also have Lammas. Yes, Lammas is actually a Christian holiday. Alternatively, for Southern Europe, they prefer, instead of Lammas on the 1st, they like to do the Feast of the Assumption of Mary on the 15th. And then, naturally, we have Midsummer, and we have Lugnasa on the Celtic reconstruction wheel here. So, basically, again, as I said, St. John, born 6 months before Jesus, his feast day, 24th, pretty much lines up perfectly with Midsummer. And because of that, a lot of people, they used to believe that herbs you picked on Midsummer were more powerful. And instead the church said, hey, that's like weird superstition. Bring it to us and we'll bless it, and then it'll be actually powerful. The thing is, the result ends up the same. You get powerful herbs around Midsummer. like the same, it's the same thing. And St. John's Day, just like Midsummer, was a day that girls would do divination on who their lovers are. They would, they'd throw flower crowns into the water or on the roof or something. They would, have feasts, and they would jump over fire and all this other kind of stuff on St. John's Day, because it was a direct carryover of the things they used to do on Midsummer. They just kept doing what they already had done for their entire history, but in a new context. That's it. Likewise, Lammas is pretty much the same thing as Lughnasadh, except in a Christian context. Lammas, or Loafmas, is literally just a bread holiday, basically, where you take your first harvest of wheat, you bake bread, you bring it to the church, and you get it blessed. Very similar to the, kind of offerings and rites of Lughnasadh, in which the god Lugh is being honored for being, god of fertility and blacksmithing and all these other kinds of things, being a solar deity. And of course, there are other holidays around this time, especially spring and in summer, right? Like we have Pentecost, which is a massive deal for Christians. That's when the Holy Spirit descended on the apostles. That's in around just a little bit after May Day. And we have also the Feast of the Transfiguration, which the only way I can describe this is that this, in August, is the day that Jesus goes from Jesus the Gray to Jesus the White. I'm not joking. That's the Feast of the Transfiguration. Jesus, basically getting a power-up. That's a Christian holiday that happens in August. And then, of course, autumn, we come to the end. We have the Feast of St. Matthew, actually, and then we also have All Hallows Eve, and they line up directly with Mabon, the autumn equinox, and with Samhain, right? So the thing is, in autumn, there are actually a ton of different holidays. It all depends with the saint feasts. It depends which region you're coming from. So, and this is the thing about Catholicism, there are way more holidays than just Christmas and Easter, way more holidays than just Lent and Shrovetide, way more going on than Pentecost and Transfiguration. There are 1,000,002 different saints, and depending on where you are, each saint's going to be very differently important to you. So, to line up with kind of the autumn equinox, there was St. Matthew, one of the apostles, the tax collector, and his feast day is a big deal. It's that autumn time, so a lot of those autumn festivals carried over from Mabon into St. Matthew's Day. Likewise, literally, a week later is the Feast of St. Michael, which arguably might even be a little bit more important, because the Feast of St. Michael is where everybody's putting out, bread and other things. They're literally setting the table with Michael at the head of the table, the archangel, and giving thanks for his protection, because he is, the right hand of God, he who is like God. He is that angel that stepping on the devil's face and the whole thing, so he's a big deal. Probably more of a big deal, honestly, than the Feast of St. Matthew in a lot of places, because everyone has something to do with St. Michael, right? Likewise, my people, the Slovenians, we have St. Martin. St. Martin is so important as a holiday, as a feast day, that it's called, Autumn Pust. Pust being Shrovetide, right? So we call our, pre-Lenten days Pust. St. Martin's Day is an autumn Pust, and there is some very, interesting folklore that, Hungarian and Slovenians believe that if you're not having a goose on St. Martin, you're not going to have a very profitable and prosperous year. Better have a goose on St. Martin's Day. But St. Martin's Day also coincides with the grape harvest. So there's a big, grape harvest, winemaking, feasting and drinking and stuff, and it's on the 13th of November. What does that have to do with any of the neo-pagan holidays, right? So while Mabon is one way to celebrate autumn and just the end of the harvest and all of that, there's a lot more than that, and especially on the Catholic holiday calendar, it entirely depends on where you're coming from. Meanwhile, Samhain, yes, Halloween, All Hallows Eve, this is one that's going to get very interesting, because did you know that All Hallows Eve is actually kind of a way for slightly acceptable ancestor veneration within Catholicism? Back in the day, people didn't believe in hell. They believed that Jesus defeated hell. So they believed everyone who died after a year of, soul school, basically, they might get stuck up to a year in purgatory to correct anything they did wrong in life. Then they became a saint. So All Saints' Day is not only for all the saints that don't have a designated feast day, like St. Nicholas, St. Martin, so on. It's also a day to recognize all of our, saints in heaven, the people who are alive in Christ after, they fell asleep, right? So there's that, and the very next day is All Souls' Day, which is for the souls who have not yet gotten out of soul school and gone up there and become a saint. It lines up perfectly with Samhain, which is a Celtic holiday to commemorate the dead when the veil is thin and all of that, and it also has much to do with syncretic events like Dia de los Muertos, right? And so we have in Latin America, people very clearly combined these two ideas, a Catholic holiday of All Hallows Eve with the indigenous traditions of honoring and respecting the dead, bringing food, spending time with them, so on and so forth. And did you know that actually All Hallows Eve didn't used to be in October? It actually used to be in May, and it wasn't until missionaries from Ireland said, hey, we don't know what to do about like this big block party they keep having in October. Can we move a holiday near here so we have a reason to celebrate? It wasn't until actually 100 years after that request that, Samhain and All Hallows Eve finally got linked up. Originally, the Pope put it in May to commemorate all the saints, and then eventually, one way or another, it got moved to October. So it actually existed far before people think it did. That holiday was always there. It's just that they moved it for convenience sake. They quite literally erected a spiritual McDonald's across from the Celts' spiritual Burger King, and they said, well, that's very nice that you have your Samhain block party, but check out our cool All Hallows Eve block party, right? And that's where the syncretism comes in, because now all the Celts are saying, oh, that looks cool, and they go over there and they celebrate that, while doing very similar things that they were just doing at their own block party. And so the story continues. But in effect, I have this image here that is very much just a direct show of all the things going on. And this is pretty much the too long didn't read of it, of, here you go, these are all the different holidays. The 8 holidays coincide perfectly with 8 Catholic holidays, and then there are even more Catholic holidays that you could look at if you really wanted to have even more of a fun time. If you wanted to do more with Pentecost, if you wanted to do more with, the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, if you wanted to do more for St. Valentine's Day, which has a little bit of syncretic elements as well, you could do so many different things. You just have to look at that calendar and realize how many of these things line up really nicely thematically with each other. And of course, when you do that, it's very easy to take the aspects of, say, Midsummer, where we're at the height of the longest day of the year, and everything is in its full, lively power, right, with the sun and the nice weather and everything else, and think about St. John's Day, in which St. John is saying, hello, here it is, we're bringing in the era of goodness, right? He's announcing Jesus, he's bringing forth the message of Jesus, just as Midsummer is bringing forth all of the bounty that's going to come for the rest of summer with all of our hard work and harvests. They link up. They link up real well. And honestly, it's entirely up to you what things you want to celebrate versus observe. I never really understood the difference between these terms until now, but I celebrate Christmas, big feast, big party with the family. I observe May Day, in which, I say, oh cool, May Day, it's time to celebrate, Mary. The entire month of May becomes like Mary's month. Right? So it's all completely customizable, and it's all entirely up to what you want to do and what you want to get out of your practice. So with that, I will see you guys next time for a conversation on the angel of the month. Not saint, not archangel, angel of the month. And I hope that this brief overview gives you guys a better idea of why saying Christians stole holidays is not correct, and how closely a lot of these holidays themes link up, and give you that option to blend your paths as you see fit. I will see you guys, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye! By the way, if you want to see these videos 2 weeks earlier, consider subscribing to my Patreon, where you not only get all these videos, but also recipe cards, specific deity profiles, and lots of other interesting things to look at. Video tiers start at $10 a month, so definitely consider checking it out.